Today we're diving into one of the most fascinating and, let's be honest, controversial religions ever born in the United States, Christian Science. It's an incredible story that weaves together this deep, personal faith, a truly singular leader, and a belief system so radical it basically challenges our whole concept of reality.
And this quote right here, this is the core of everything. Just try to wrap your head around it for a second. Imagine being told that sickness, anything from a simple cold to something much more serious, isn't physically real. That it's all just a mental mistake, a kind of illusion that you can fix, not with medicine, but through prayer. This was the mind-bending revelation of its founder, Mary Baker Eddy.
But here's the big puzzle. If you believe the material world is just an illusion, how do you end up building something this massive, this real? This is the Mother Church in Boston, the global headquarters for the faith. So the question is, how did this one super abstract idea grow into such a powerful international institution? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack.
To really understand this whole movement, we've got to start with the theology, because trust me, it is truly one of a kind.
Okay, so the foundation of Christian Science is this really intense form of what's called philosophical idealism. The basic idea is that the only thing that's actually real is the spiritual world. God, mind, truth, love. Everything else, the physical world that you can see and touch, along with all its baggage like disease, evil, and even death, it's all just an illusion, a big mistake in our thinking.
And an idea this radical doesn't just appear out of thin air. It was actually born from one woman's lifelong, desperate search for relief from her own suffering.
So let me introduce you to Mary Baker Eddy. From the time she was a child, she was just racked by these chronic, debilitating illnesses. And you have to remember, this was the 19th century. Medicine back then could be brutal, often doing more harm than good. Her suffering was just relentless. One critic even called her a kind of anthology of 19th century nervous ailments. So her entire life became this quest to find a cure.
Eventually, that search led her to a man named Phineas Quimby. He was a really popular mind-cure healer who had this idea that disease was basically just a wrong belief and that the truth is the cure. Eddy became his patient and, for a while, a huge fan. But later on, she would completely distance herself, insisting that her own system was a totally unique, divine revelation from God. And as you can imagine, that claim would be debated for the next 100 years.
So this personal search, it all comes to a head in one single pivotal moment, an event that the church sees as the very birth of its faith.
So get this, just a couple of weeks after her mentor, Quimby, dies, Eddy slips on an icy street in Massachusetts. She describes her injuries as incredibly severe, maybe even fatal. Her doctor, she said, basically gave her no hope. But on the third day, as she's lying in bed, she picks up her Bible, reads a story about one of Jesus' healings, and in that instant, she wrote, "The healing truth dawned upon my sense." She got up, got dressed, and felt totally miraculously cured.
But, and this is a big but, even this founding story is full of controversy. Years later, the doctor who actually treated her, a guy named Alvin Cushing, swore in a legal document that her injuries were not life-threatening and that she actually started to get better after he gave her morphine. And this conflict right here, divine healing versus medical reality, would become a central fight for the church for its entire history.
After her recovery, Eddy threw herself into teaching what she believed she'd discovered. She put it all down in her book, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. And to show just how important it was, she eventually ordained the book, along with the Bible, as the joint pastor of her new church, which is wild. To this day, church sermons are just reading straight from those two texts.
So, a personal revelation has been turned into a sacred text. What's the next step? Well, you build a global institution.
And the growth was just explosive. So in 1879, the church is officially founded. Then she starts the Massachusetts Metaphysical College, where she charges students $300 a pop for a course, a fortune back then. And she teaches thousands, making herself a very wealthy woman. By 1894, they build that massive mother church we saw. And then they launch a globally respected newspaper, the Christian Science Monitor, which, by the way, has won 7 Pulitzer Prizes.
And just to give you an idea of how big this got, at its peak in 1936, Christian Science was the fastest growing religion in the United States, with almost 270,000 members. It had become a serious cultural force.
But that explosive growth just didn't last. By 1990, membership in the U.S. had crashed to just over 100,000. So what happened? Well, a huge part of it was this growing clash between the church's core beliefs and all the crazy advances of the modern world.
And that brings us to its really controversial legacy, which is all rooted in its very unique theology and its real-world consequences.
So even though it's called Christian Science, its beliefs are way different from mainstream Christianity. God isn't a personal guy in the sky. God is an abstract principle. Jesus isn't the one and only Son of God. He's a way-shower who just showed everyone the truth. And the idea of atonement isn't about a sacrifice for sin, but an at-one-ment, literally, becoming one with God by realizing you're spiritual.
And of course, these beliefs had enormous public health consequences. I mean, if you think sickness is just an illusion, why would you report a contagious disease to the health department? This old magazine cover from 1902 just captures that clash perfectly. You've got the law pointing at a sign that says contagious diseases must be reported, while basically shooing away a Christian Science healer. This was a real fight happening in towns all over America.
And the consequences were often tragic. The rejection of medicine led to preventable deaths, including the deaths of children, which led to parents being put on trial for manslaughter. There were huge public fights over things like vaccination. And then there was this really strange belief Eddy had in what she called malicious animal magnetism, the idea that other people's evil thoughts could actually physically harm you. This created a lot of fear inside the movement.
And right at the center of all of this was Mary Baker Eddy herself. Mark Twain, the author, was one of her biggest and loudest critics. And yet, even he couldn't help but be completely captivated by her. He called her the most interesting woman that ever lived and the most extraordinary. She was just this incredibly complex, charismatic, and undeniably powerful figure.
So when you really boiled it all down, you just can't separate the religion from its founder. The whole story of Christian Science, its radical ideas, its institutional might, and its endless controversies, it's all a direct result of Mary Baker Eddy's very personal, lifelong quest to make sense of her own pain.
And all of this leaves us with a question that's just as relevant today as it was 100 years ago. When a person's faith tells them how to handle their health, where do we draw the line? Where does religious freedom end, and where does medical responsibility, especially when it comes to protecting children, begin? It's a tough conflict that Christian Science really brought to the public square, and it's one we are absolutely still grappling with today.